As the Israelites cried out to God, one man stepped forward to answer that prayer. A simple man watched as a foreign king turned Israel into a mockery. But Othniel didn't feel fear. He felt furious. So he walked to the very front line and challenged the army of Aram-Naharaim. It was winter in the hill country, and smoke was rising from a city called Debir. Othniel stood at the edge of the camp, watching it burn. His sword was still wet from fighting. Around him, the men of Judah waited to see who would step forward next. An old man named Caleb called out to the soldiers, "Whoever attacks this city and takes it, I will give him my daughter Achsah as his wife." Caleb was old, but he had walked through the desert with Moses long ago. He had seen giants and was never afraid of them. The soldiers looked at each other. No one moved, but Othniel did not wait. He turned to the men near him and said,
"Follow me! We will take this city today!"
He picked up his shield and walked toward the city gate. But to understand how he got here, we must go back to where his story began. Othniel was the son of Kenaz and the younger brother of Caleb. He grew up training with a sword, while other young men stayed safe near their tents. He learned how to fight, and he learned how to be brave. When the people of Israel came into the land of Canaan, they were given the hill country to live in. But many cities in that land still belonged to other people. People who did not want to leave. One of those cities was called Kiriath Sepher, and its walls were strong. Before the army marched, Othniel sat outside his tent the night before, sharpening his sword on a flat stone. The fire in front of him was small, just enough to see by. His brother Caleb walked over and sat beside him, watching him work the blade. Caleb did not say much. He simply looked at the city far in the distance, its walls dark against the night sky, and then looked back at his younger brother. Othniel kept sharpening, the sound of stone against metal filling the quiet between them. When the blade was sharp enough, he set it down beside him and looked up at the stars, waiting for the morning. When the sun rose, Othniel stood and tied his sandals tight. He picked up his shield from where it leaned against a rock, and he walked toward the men who were gathering near the edge of the camp. They were checking their spears, tightening straps on their arms, filling water skins for the day ahead. Othniel walked among them, and he walked up the dirt road toward the city. The sun was hot above him. As he got closer, he could see men standing on top of the wall, watching him come. He raised his hand, and the soldiers behind him spread out near the wall. The men on top of the wall shouted down and threw stones, but Othniel kept walking. He reached the gate. He looked back at the men carrying a heavy log and said, "Break it down! Do not stop until it falls!" They swung the log against the wooden doors again and again until the wood cracked open. Othniel ran through the broken gate first. Inside, the fighting was close and hard. Men pushing through narrow streets between stone houses, shields knocking against each other in the tight spaces. But by the end of the day, the city belonged to Judah. Othniel walked back to his brother's tent, still covered in dust. Caleb kept his promise. He gave his daughter Achsah to Othniel as his wife. Achsah remembered her father had also promised her land with water on it. Since the ground near the city was dry, she went to her father and said, "Father, give me springs of water, for the land you gave me is dry." Caleb gave her the springs nearby. Othniel built a home on that land, near the springs his wife had asked for. In the cool part of the morning, before the sun grew strong, Achsah would walk down to the spring with a clay jar resting on her shoulder, filling it with water for the day. Othniel would often walk with her part way, carrying nothing, simply enjoying the quiet before the work of the day began. But while Othniel built a peaceful life, darkness was quietly returning to Israel.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from. Do you want to learn how to make these videos? Go to my YouTube page and watch the member-only video. I provide all the prompts I use, tools I use, and how I animate.
In the evenings, they sat together outside their tent, eating bread and olives, and Othniel would tell her small pieces of the battle at Kiriath Sepher, things he had not had time to speak of before. Their land had grain fields nearby, and Othniel spent many seasons walking those fields, watching the grain grow tall, then watching his men gather it in at harvest. Othniel now had land, a wife, and a name people knew throughout the tribe of Judah. Years passed in this way, quiet and full. Othniel grew older, his hair turning gray, his hands rougher from years of working the land instead of fighting wars. But the people of Israel began to forget God. They started living near the people who did not believe in him. And slowly, without seeming to notice it happening, they began to worship false gods made of wood and stone, gods that other nations bowed before. Othniel watched this happen from a distance, shaking his head at the altars built on hillsides near his own home. But the people did not listen to the old judges and elders who warned them. So God let a powerful king come against them, a king from the east named Cushan-Rishathaim. His army marched into Israel, taking city after city. He placed his own men over the towns, and the people had to give him their grain and their silver every year. This went on for 8 years. Mothers watched their sons taken away to work for this king. Farmers grew food only to watch it taken from them by soldiers who came at harvest time, loading carts with grain that should have fed their own children through the winter. In the town nearest Othniel's home, an officer of the foreign king set up a post by the gate, counting every basket that passed through, taking a share for his king before anyone else could eat. Finally, the people could not bear it any longer, and they cried out to God, saying, "Lord, save us from this king, for we cannot bear this any longer." By this time, Othniel was an old man, living quietly with his wife on his land. One evening, he sat outside his tent with Achsah, the fire low between them, eating a simple meal of bread and lentils. She noticed he had grown quiet, staring past the fire toward the hills, where smoke still rose from towns under the foreign king's hand. She set down her bread and touched his arm gently, but said nothing, knowing the weight that was on him. That night, as Othniel lay down to sleep, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He woke before the sun rose, sat up suddenly and looked toward the corner of the tent where, hanging on a wooden peg, his old sword had rested untouched for many years. He rose, walked over to it, and lifted it down. Dust had gathered along the blade. He sat by the fire, taking a cloth, and slowly began to wipe the years of dust away, his fingers moving carefully along the edge he had once kept so sharp. Achsah woke and watched him from where she lay. "You mean to fight again?" she said quietly. Othniel did not look up from the blade. "The Lord has put it in me. I cannot sit while our people suffer." She rose and brought him bread for the road ahead, wrapping it in cloth without another word, because she had been the daughter of Caleb, and she knew what it meant when a man was called to fight. He walked outside and sent word to the towns of Judah, calling men to come and fight. Riders went from village to village, telling farmers in their fields and shepherds with their flocks that Othniel, the one who had taken Kiriath Sepher long ago, was calling men to war again. Men left their farms and picked up their old weapons, blowing dust off shields that had hung on walls for years, sharpening spear tips that had gone dull from disuse. They walked from their homes along dry paths and gathered together near a wide field outside the hills until there were many of them standing in one place, the sound of their voices and the clatter of their gear filling the open ground. Othniel walked among them, checking that each man had a weapon fit for the road ahead, stopping here and there to tighten a strap or test the edge of a blade with his thumb. When they were ready, he stood before them and said, "Men, gather close. We go now to fight this king and free our people. Do not be afraid." They gave a shout and began to march north toward the land where the enemy king's men were stationed. The march was long, through dry riverbeds where no water ran, and over rocky hills that slowed their pace. At night they camped under the open sky, small fires scattered across the ground, men resting their tired feet and eating what bread they had carried. Scouts went ahead of the army each day, moving quietly through the hills, and came back each night with news, telling Othniel where the enemy soldiers were, and how many of them there were, which roads they guarded, and where they slept without much watch kept over their camp. Othniel listened by the fire each night and made his plan, sometimes staying awake long after his men had fallen asleep. When the two armies finally stood facing each other across an open field, the enemy soldiers were calm. They had not had to fight hard in 8 years, and they stood with the ease of men who expected no real challenge. Othniel raised his sword and shouted to his men, "Today the Lord fights with us! Forward!" His army moved forward across the field. The two sides crashed together, swords against shields. Othniel fought near the front of his men, just as he had done many years before at the gate of Kiriath Sepher, his old strength returning to him in the heat of the fight. The enemy soldiers, who thought this would be easy, found themselves pushed back again and again, their formation breaking apart under the force of men who had everything to fight for. By the time the sun went down, the enemy army was broken and running, fleeing back toward their own land, never to come against Israel again under that king. Othniel led his men back home through the same hills they had crossed before, the mood of the camp much lighter than it had been on the way north. Word spread quickly from town to town that the enemy king was gone, that his men had fled, that the people no longer had to give away their grain and silver. People came out of their homes to watch the army walk by. Some brought water for the tired soldiers, holding jars out as the men passed. Others simply stood along the road and watched the man who had freed them pass, an old man who had picked up his sword one last time. When Othniel finally reached his own home, Achsah was waiting near the springs where she so often drew water. She set down her jar and walked toward him as he came over the last hill, and they walked the rest of the way home together, saying little, simply glad to be side by side again. The people of Israel made Othniel their judge. He stayed to help guide the people and to settle their arguments, sitting at the gate of his town many mornings, listening to the disputes brought before him and giving judgment with the same calm he had carried into battle. And as long as Othniel lived, the land was quiet. The fields were planted and gathered in peace, the grain filling the storehouses instead of foreign carts. Families lived in their homes without fear. The land had rest for 40 years.
These videos takes hours and hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.